So, welcome back to another presentation that I delivered at the recent PSD workshop where I covered strategies for managing hyperglycemia in patients receiving nutritional support. Now, here's my outline. As a background, first I will discuss the importance of nutritional support in hospitalized patients and then briefly review the different methods of nutritional support and then go to the prevalence of hyperglycemia associated with the therapy and its impact on the hospital morbidity as well as mortality. Number four is management of hyperglycemia in the general recommendation. And then lastly, case studies that will serve as a summary and a review. So the significance of nutritional status. Uh, Malnutrition is present in about 30 to 50% of hospitalized adult patients, and they are high risk for malnutrition complications. And up to 20% of hospitalized diabetic patients need or candidate for nutritional support therapy. In-hospital poor nutrition is associated with many adverse outcomes that include morbidity, such as increase in the rate of infection, impaired wound healing, muscle wasting, etc. Likewise, mortality and longer hospital stays, thus hospital costs. So, providing hospitalized patients with ideal nutrition is an important aspect of care. So, to achieve the nutritional status in patients unable to consume food orally, there are two supplemental nutritional regimens that are available. One is enteral on your left and the parenteral on your right, or parenteral nutrition. Enteral nutrition when intestinal function is intact in terms of absorptions of nutrients. Parenteral nutrition, on the other hand, is uh, needed in a patient with deranged gastrointestinal absorption or GI absorption. While looking at the meta-analysis of a 21 RCT showed that early enteral nutrition versus delayed enteral nutrition was associated with a significant reduction in mortality. So the recent ASPEN, American Society of Parenteral and Enteral Nutrition recommendation guideline is to initiate enteral nutrition within 24 to 48 hours following the onset of critical illness and admission to the ICU. The guideline further stated early parenteral nutrition should be instituted when enteral nutrition isn't feasible or sufficient in high risk or poorly nourished patients. Let's go over some of the different nutritional formulas. Here are some short lists and by no means complete. Number one, we have polymeric formulas, which is a standard formula. It's composed of intact protein, disaccharides, as well as polysaccharides and variable amount of fat. Then we have oligomeric formulas, enzymatic hydrolyzed casein or elementar formula, which are protein that are digested as amino acid or partially hydrolyzed, hyperosmolar, that contain nitrogen in the form of free amino acids or peptides with impaired digestive, and these are used in impaired digestive and absorptive capacity. Now we have also disease specific formulas designed to meet variety of medical and nutritional needs such as renal formula, hepatic and diabetic formula with low carbohydrates, high fiber, etc. That we are interested in this presentation. We also have some formula like pulmonary formula and immune enhancing formula. Okay, the enteral nutrition has different method of scheduled feeding, such as it could be continuous, infusing over 24 hours period. It could be bolus, mimicking the meals, or nocturnal or intermittent or cycled scheduled, like infusion at night, typically 12 hours infusion, and usually these are just transitional states. No, these are usually done in a stroke patient who need to do some physical therapy in the morning and have to be fed in the evening. Now, um, enteral nutrition is remarkably beneficial. However, it is not without risk or complication. As you can see, this is a pyramid. At the base of the pyramid, the complication of metabolic complication is the most common, such as fluid and electrolytes abnormalities, glucose intolerance, and electrolytes abnormalities. Second is infection. Yeah, there may be formula contamination, unsanitary equipment, failure to follow certain appropriate protocols in handling the formula. And the next is gastrointestinal. The patient may have diarrhea on the formula use, constipation, gastric distension or bloating, gastric residual or delayed gastric emptying, even nausea and vomiting. And at the peak of the pyramid is the less common, but it may be present and that's mechanical. Uh, Feeding tube obstruction. There may be feeding tube dislodge, nasal irritation, even skin irritations. Now, we know the importance of nutritional support. However, nutritional support is associated with metabolic complication. One of the most important metabolic complication is hyperglycemia, and so called nutritional induced hyperglycemia. And it occurs in about 30% in patients receiving enteral nutrition and as high as 50% in patients receiving parenteral nutrition. And these occur both in DM patient or non-DM patients. Now, hyperglycemia has been reported in up to 30% of patients receiving enteral nutrition. Hyperglycemia is defined here in this study as 200 above 200 milligrams per deciliter. Now, while parenteral nutrition not only is associated with hyperglycemia, but it is also increased in mortality and a marker of poor outcome in hospital setting. In other words, there is a strong correlation between total parenteral nutrition induced hyperglycemia and poor clinical outcome. Now, the possible reason for nutritional induced hyperglycemia may be partly due to acute illness itself, stress, which activates the sympathetic nervous system and triggers release of counter-regulatory hormone, aka stress hormone. May also be from the formula itself, nutritional formula itself. Additionally, parenteral nutrition due to loss of normal incretin response to oral feeding. So, the objective of giving nutrition to malnourished patients is to improve hospital outcome. But to have, but you have to manage the nutritional induced hyperglycemia in order not to increase morbidity. So, in general, rule is to synchronize nutritional therapy with metabolic control. Metabolic control means to achieve glycemic target with the use of different insulin regimen. So we need to match the insulin dose with the amount of dextrose infused, whether it's tube feeding or parenteral feeding. So we go to the management of hyperglycemia in patients during enteral nutrition. Okay, these are clinical observations, observational study comparing 30 biphasic insulin versus glargine and lispro regimen in non-critically ill DM patient on continuous enteral nutrition. There are three groups. Group 1 were assigned to glargine, lispro, basal bolus. Group 2 were assigned to 70-30 Humulin twice a day, and Group 3 70-30 Humulin 3 times a day. So in non-critically ill diabetic patient receiving continuous enteral feeding therapy, in this study, the use of 70-30 biphasic insulin, DMPH, may be preferable to a glargine insulin or glargine lispro regimen. This preference is due to the MPH's shorter half-life, which allow for easier titration or discontinuation if tube feeding are stopped, and its lower cost. Interruption in the tube feeding can increase the risk of hypoglycemia in patients on long-acting insulin therapy. Uh, to mitigate this risk, the prompt initiation of intravenous fluid containing 10% dextrose at the rate of the enteral nutrition therapy can help maintain glucose level until enteral nutrition is reestablished. As you can see in the slides, the graph shows the red one, glargine and lispro, the fluctuation of blood sugar, and you see that the 70-30 3 times a day, which is the blue one, has a better fluctuations of blood sugar over a period of time. And at the right side, you can see the percent of hypoglycemia and the percent value in target in terms of blood sugar. You see that lower hypoglycemia in 70-30 3 times a day, and 69% of these patients on 70-30 3 times a day reach the target goal of blood glucose compared to the other two groups. Now, the insulin regimen varies based on the enteral nutrition feeding schedule. For continuous feeding, a more bolus-based regimen is used. For the cycled feeding, intermediate insulin combined with rapid-acting insulin is administered at the start of tube feeding, along with correctional short-acting insulin. Now, for bolus feeding, only short-acting or rapid-acting insulin is given prior to its bolus meals. Now, there is an unexpected interruption in enteral feeding, and administration of long-acting insulin may increase the risk of hypoglycemia. That's why studies have shown that 70-30 twice a day or thrice a day seems to be better than basal bolus, especially for hypoglycemia. Now, let's go now to parenteral nutrition. Now, there's no gold standard regimen for insulin matching for parenteral nutrition because of limited RCT studies. But here, one approach on how to manage the hyperglycemia in patients receiving enteral or parenteral nutrition. This is from Professor Umperes group. Okay, on top, if you have enteral and parenteral nutrition initiated, you have to divide the patient whether the patient is non-DM or non-DM patient. Now, start POC blood glucose monitoring every 6 hours. And for diabetic patient, you continue the point of care blood glucose monitoring. If the blood glucose is more than 180 by one time, or blood sugar with the range of 140 to 180, that's twice. And then you, if you're going to give patient, if you're going to give enteral feeding, use diabetic specific formula as recommended. Start insulin therapy with basal insulin with a range of 0.5, 0.15, to 0.25 units per kilogram using NPH every 8 hours or Glargine once a day or Determine once or twice a day. Supplemental short-acting insulin every 4 to 6 hours. While on patient on parenteral, we try to reduce, the recommendation is to reduce dextrose to a range of 150 to 250 milligrams per deciliter per day and start insulin therapy with mixed regular insulin with parenteral nutrition. So the computation, the recommended computation or range of insulin, regular insulin that is incorporated in the parenteral nutrition formula is 7 to 10 units per 100 grams of glucose if non-diabetic. If no history of DM, it's about 5 to 7 units per 100 milligrams of dextrose. And this is supplemented by short-acting insulin every 4 to 6 hours. Then number 1 is when you start with this, you titrate daily insulin therapy for glycemic control, review continuous medication administered, request to notified if nutritional support regimen change, and initiate appropriate discharge planning. So in summary, for patient with diabetes or for DM patient with significant hyperglycemia already receiving a basal bolus insulin regimen or any kind of insulin regimen, you monitor blood glucose every 6 hours, and if not yet on blood glucose target, the recommendation is to add 0.1 unit of regular insulin per gram of dextrose in total parenteral nutrition as needed. So you monitor blood glucose level throughout a 24-hour period. If glucose control remains insufficient, adjust the regular insulin glucose by adding 0.05 unit per gram of dextrose to a previously determined amount. However, do not exceed a total of 0.3 units of regular insulin per grams of dextrose. If blood glucose remains outside of the target range, the insulin to dextrose limit is reached, consider supplementing with subcutaneous insulin or an insulin infusion. Now, manage hyperglycemia and prevent hypoglycemia. Okay, so we treat hypo if the blood sugar is less than 70 milligrams per deciliter in patient on enteral as well as parenteral nutrition by giving 25 or 50 ml of IV, 50% dextrose or 1 milligram IM glucagon if no IV access. However, locally, I don't think we have glucagon available. So, then you monitor blood glucose and repeat treatment as needed. Adjust insulin to prevent recurrence. So we go now to case study. Okay, so a 70-year-old woman admitted with a stroke with prior history of type 2 DM controlled on oral agent. The blood glucose level on admission 150 milligrams per deciliter. The A1C was 7%. Currently, she is unable to swallow. So a continuous enteral nutrition is started on hospital day 2. So the insulin need and enteral nutrition, the question is what insulin treatment would you recommend for a DM patient on enteral tube feeding with a blood glucose more than 200 milligrams per deciliter? Or would you give sliding scale only with rapid acting insulin? Or number 2, IV insulin with variable rate infusion? 3, NPH and regular insulin every 8 hours? And 4, Glargine once a day, degludec once or twice a day, or supplemental short-acting insulin every 4 to 6 hours. So I'll let you briefly pause for a while and try to answer the question. So let's review the management of patient receiving enteral nutrition. The question there is the patient is receiving a continuous enteral nutrition feeding. So the recommendation is basal insulin, okay, 40 to 50% of total daily dose as long or intermediate acting insulin given once or twice a day, and combine it with short acting 50 to 60% given 3 times a day, uh, uh, given every 6 hours, no? Or total daily dose given every 6 hours. This approach provides a basal insulin regimen to maintain a steady glucose level along with supplemental short-acting insulin to address postprandial glucose spikes and maintain overall glycemic control. The important things here is you need to monitor the blood sugar of the patient. Okay. Let's go now to total parenteral nutrition. This is a 55-year-old obese male admitted with enterocutaneous fistula with no prior history of diabetes. On admission, blood sugar 189 milligrams per deciliter, A1C of 7.5, previously undiagnosed diabetes. Okay, patient is not eating and anticipated not to be able to eat for a week. So a total parenteral nutrition will be initiated using a 1,477 ml or cc of smoked cabiven bag, which provide approximately 187 grams of glucose. Patient is currently on D5 containing fluid at a rate of 100 ml per hour. Current blood glucose level within the range of 160 to 200. No? On short-acting analog every 6 hours as correctional dose. So the question is, what is the insulin treatment would you recommend? You use an IV insulin separate from total parenteral nutrition, 2 insulin added to total parenteral nutrition, or number 3 basal bolus insulin. So let's review the question. Okay, so IV added to TPN bag is the right answer. And the question is, what insulin will you use? Will you use rapid acting analog? Will you use regular insulin or a basal analog? Okay. The answer for this is, of course, regular insulin. Only regular insulin is compatible with TPN formulas. No? Rapid acting analog are not compatible. Basal analog are not given through IV, it's given through subcutaneous. Okay. So the next question is, how much regular insulin? Will you give 20 units, 18, or 10 units? Okay. Now, the TPN with 0.1 unit of insulin per gram of dextrose, this ratio should not result in hypoglycemia. So, the grams of glucose contained in the TPN that will be given to the patient is 187 grams of glucose. That's at the bottom of your slide. So if you times 0.1 unit, it will be a total of 18.7. Round off, it's a 20 units. So you can give 18 or 20 units. Okay. So a guide to total parenteral nutrition. Again, guideline is add 0.1 unit regular per gram of dextrose. Okay, that we already calculated for our patient. If not enough, add 0.05 of regular insulin added to the 0.1, but not to exceed 0.3 units in total. No? Sub-Q insulin or an infusion may be added if blood glucose continues to be out of range. Now, the blood glucose monitor of this patient every 6 hours shows still out of range. Most of it more than 180. There is you can see 232 as the highest. Most of them above 180. Okay. So the question is how much insulin will you add? And is it 10 units? Is it 7 units? Is it 2 units? Okay. So the answer here is if you use the 187 grams that is present, dextrose present in the TPN, and you're gonna times it for 0.05, it will turn out to be 9 or 10 units. So you add 18. If you use 18 initially, you add 9, that will be 27 units. Okay. So the Aspen guideline, as a summary, check glucose every 6 hours on TPN. Only regular insulin is compatible with TPN. Number 3, limit initial dextrose in a TPN solution for patients with hyperglycemia to 150 to 200 grams per day. And do not increase dextrose calories by a TPN until glucose are consistently below 100 milligrams per deciliter. So lastly, 5 to 15% of insulin in TPN adheres to the tubing. Therefore, insulin requirements may appear a little bit high. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening.